Welcome to Nuanced Beauty. This podcast is intended to be a spot where my husband Bill and I will capture some complex thoughts and challenge us to hold to our opinions loosely so that we can see the beauty in others and the beauty in ourselves. I want to challenge us to dive deeper into those everyday topics and those sticky topics that we might shy away from, or we might bulldoze over others with our opinions. Because I think there's wisdom in this idea that if we all thought exactly the same, there would be no need for anyone else. So let's have a conversation and let's get nuanced. Hi guys, welcome back to Nuanced Beauty.
Hey everybody. So we are out of pre-recorded episodes that we did because we went on vacation back to Seattle.
Yes, and I would have to say that if you listen to How to Travel with Kids, that trip was much harder than this one.
We did better.
We did better, and it was West Coast time zone from East Coast.
I think Aaron having his own seat made all the difference.
Having his own seat on the airplane, and the folks that we stayed with, we had 2 separate bedrooms. So Aaron not making the time zone change, we were able to accommodate and still feel like people because each of us could take turns, shifts for watching him. So those 2 things, sleep and airplane flight.
And 6 months more of childhood development.
Made a big difference.
Made me think that maybe we might go someplace sometime ever again.
Someday.
Every time we travel, I say never again.
Uh-huh.
And then
this time it wasn't the end of the
world.
We
had no choice this time, but we had to go.
Yeah.
So this was our first time back to Seattle, as a couple anyway, since we left. I had to go back for work, but that was just quick, like overnight trips. And I didn't see or do really anything. But we had a full week where we saw everybody, and we really got to sit and observe what Seattle is like in a way that it's hard to observe yourself when you live in a place. And we kicked around when we first started this podcast, and Christina's like, I'm going to write a book about stuff. We were talking about highlighting a lot of these differences, and we didn't find that many, so we ended up not going down that road. But we really found some key differences that were highlighted going back again.
Yeah. Should we jump into those, or should we jump?
That's what I'm leading you into.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Here's the tea.
I know,
Here's
but
the
it's
ball
not the main
on the
part
tee.
of the conversation. So yes, one of the big differences is people don't notice your kids when you're out and about. Like here, there is a regular acknowledgement that there are children in the room and an engagement. And along those lines,
poor lady on the flight.
Oh yeah, the return home, the Seattle to here flight.
So our strategy was we had 4 seats, and we had the aisle seat and the middle seat of a row on both sides. So Christina and I sat on the aisle seat across from each other, and we each had a kid on the outboard side of us.
The middle seat.
Which is great because the kids are in the middle seat. Kids are small. That works out. But the window seat person has to be a bit cooperative. And on the flight there was kind of like this.
There's an older
dad who was kind of like
from Britain.
He's in Britain.
His kid was turning 21 or 18.
Yeah,
and they were exploring the States.
A mostly grown-up kid in the next row, so he gets it.
And he's a boy.
He's a boy.
Boy dad.
And then there was this poor lady who I don't know if she doesn't have kids, doesn't like kids, whatever. She was very kind but very uncomfortable.
Probably in her 30s or maybe early 40s, and business
but,
professional.
Infants, they think with their feet as much as their hands. So they're toddlers. So, Aaron was just like sitting there, like poking her in the leg with his foot, and I could not stop him. He's just sitting there, just drilling into her thigh with that toe.
Poor lady.
And she was trying so hard just to shift into the wall of the plane.
Yeah.
So that kind of just a huge example of like other people just not wanting to interact with your kids at all.
Yeah, it's very prevalent, and we just, having been away long enough, we didn't notice as much. And then the other thing that really stood out with kids was going to the park in equal number of adults to kids on the playground, because like I feel like what we've observed here is you can go to events or you can hang out with couples or parties. The kids all go play, and the adults have conversations. But since moving here, our eldest is a little more in our business and not going off to play. And being back, I had the epiphany of, Oh, all of his playtime was arranged play,
Hmm.
or it was one-on-one with adults. So he just has a totally different mind
There was
thought
3 or 4
process.
families at the park, each playing independently, not with each other at all. Each parent, one parent playing with one child in the park.
Mhm.
All just happened to be at the same time, but in no way with one another.
Yeah.
But the
And
other thing, and this has been something that we've struggled with in our relationships here, is people aren't from Seattle. There's very
yes,
few people who are from
a
Seattle.
lot of
A lot of
transplants.
transplants, a lot of people that don't have family local to them.
Mhm.
So when we did have relationships, we formed really tight relationships with our friends because they didn't have family either
Mhm.
around. So we had each other. Whereas here in the Southeast, a lot of people have their extended family close to hand.
Yeah, either they live here very locally or they are within a day's drive
Hmm.
and people put forth the effort to visit their family on holidays.
A crazy amount of effort.
Yeah, like thinking back to our days in Seattle, we always did a Friendsgiving. And it's because there are so many people without family in the location that it makes total sense to do a Friendsgiving and lots of people come. But since being here, we've observed that most people have family or
Hmm.
someone who has family somewhere
Yeah.
close enough that they're willing to make the drive
I
for them.
I keep hearing this comment, and it's just befuddling to me. Where they're like, "Yeah, my kids only see their grandparents like 4 or 5 times a year, and that's not
Yeah.
acceptable." I'm like, "My kids have seen their grandparents 4 or 5 times in their life."
Like, are we crazy? Are we
I
bad?
think we're the weird ones, and that's why this is such a topic for a podcast like this, because we're feeling this tension
Yes.
of what we
Friends
don't get it
or
in a way.
family? Who's closer to you?
Yeah,
Who do you call on when stuff goes awry in your life?
who's your support?
Who's your support network? And
Hmm.
for us, our formative 20s, early marriage, it was friends. It was always friends.
Always
Friends
friends.
were the people who we call first and foremost
Hmm.
for getting together, for holidays, for parties, for
For
anything.
illness,
Like
for
once we had kids, it was still a friend
yeah,
that we would call, and our friends were as close as family.
and we very much thought of them that way.
Uh-huh. And so now being down in the southeast where people are actually culturally seem closer to family and friends come second,
Hmm.
it's like we have to wrestle. This is where like the nuance comes in. The beauty is wrestling for what's the point of having friends and what's the point of family.
Yeah,
And
is there value of relationships that aren't familial when you have so many that are?
mm-hmm,
Because I think I don't know if you've heard this comment explicitly, but it's like, oh no, I have a community. I have an aunt and an uncle and a cousin and all this. Like, look, I have this
I
community.
have all
Look,
this
this
family.
community I have.
Uh-huh.
But we're like, because we were trying to launch community groups at various places and talking to people about our experience in Seattle, and some people were really into what we were saying, and some people were like, "Oh yeah, I have that. I see my whole family every Sunday." I'm like,
Like we have dinner together once a week.
that's different. It's awesome. I'm
Yes.
jealous, but I think it's different.
Yes.
And I haven't quite put my finger on how.
Well, and I think that that's where what jumps out for me. The difference is like you don't get to choose your family, and no matter how terribly dysfunctional a relationship, you are touched in a way that you cannot remove them from your family. Whereas
Which,
friends,
before you move on from that, is a beautiful thing. It is
yes,
as unconditional a love as can be
yeah,
because you are family.
uh-huh. And as friends, I think you totally get to choose.
Hmm.
You get to choose who are your friends and you get to remove yourself from friend circles if you want to.
Yeah.
But likewise, if you choose to commit to friends in a level of like a familial
You
um
like me. You really like me.
yeah, it has this like deep like love that is different than a family love.
I suppose you could say you value the thing that you fight for,
Yeah.
and you really have to fight for friendships as an adult.
Mhm.
As a kid, it's just whoever's playing in the backyard. But as an adult, you have to fight for those relationships. They don't just happen. So when you fought for them, you value them that much more sweetly.
Mhm. And so going back to Seattle and touching base with all of these folks who we value like family, and it's like it's bittersweet and it's hard, and it's been an eye opener for us, because we did have like a couple back in Seattle who were they had both grandparents around,
Mm-hmm.
and so they were pretty committed to their families, and their time was spent with families. And I think
They were the weird ones.
and we thought, yeah, we kind of viewed it as like slightly weird, and like also like a subtle like, yeah, but like why don't you want to spend time with all these people who are like your friends and like your community, like
Mm-hmm.
they matter too.
Right, because we weren't trivia night friends, not to belittle trivia,
Yeah.
or fantasy football friends, not to belittle fantasy football, but we were, a intentional community, like faith group.
Yeah.
So we were very intimate in each other's lives. It wasn't like, hey, why didn't you show up to trivia night? It was, why didn't you show up for me when things were hard?
Yeah, like going through life circumstances and such.
Yeah, it was a little bit deeper, and I think maybe that's where our language fails us.
Mhm.
Because were they friends? Is that a word you can use there? I think
Uh-huh.
I almost think that there should be a stronger word there.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and
so between
that's
friends and family, maybe like a fremily.
no. Well, and that's where we were kind of chatting a little bit in preparation about the idea of blood is thicker than water.
Yeah, there's that phrase that's out there. It says blood is thicker than water, and colloquially,
You
sounds
think
like
of it as your family
is
is
more.
more significant
Hmm.
than your friends because they are your blood.
But and idioms mean what the community thinks they mean. So I'm not saying that
It's
you're
not
wrong to
that.
think that. I'm not saying you're
Yeah.
wrong to think that, because that's
Yeah.
just what idioms are idiomatic. But uh, another interpretation of that is
Uh-huh.
comes from a Christian context of the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. So it's
Mhm.
actually saying these covenantal relationships that you form are more meaningful than your relational covenants. And I think that's supported in Scripture,
Yeah.
where
In
uh,
the days of Jesus and the 12 disciples. Nobody, I loved that Twitter phrase that came out. It was like a tweet or
mhm.
whatever. I'm not on Twitter. And it said, no one talks about the miracle of a guy in his 30s maintaining 12 best friends.
Yes,
That's a
that
miracle.
is a miracle.
Yes.
Uh,
Go on.
but it is through Scripture where it discusses mother leaving son and daughter leaving father to follow Christ, and people go up to Jesus and like, hey, your mom's outside, and so he goes, who's my mom? Because that uh, wasn't the priority relationship.
It was the
Uh,
relationship with
it was
God.
a relationship with God, and this covenantal relationship we have with one another, who follow Him.
Has an immense
Uh,
significant value.
yeah.
Yeah, but that's not, and then this is where like kind of throwing the ball back in the other
Oh, that was the
direction.
other thing. Sorry, I had one more part to that.
Okay.
We talked about this in terms of marriage.
Hmm.
Christina and I are not blood related.
As a matter of fact, we
Thank
are
God.
not.
We are not. But our relationship is so much more intimate and important to me,
Uh-huh.
you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good, good. Than any familial relationship, because of the commitment, the choice that we made, and the promises we made to one another.
Yeah.
And I think that's to a lesser extent true with your non-familial relationships. They're so much more intense because you have chosen them.
Chosen
I
it.
think I think marriage is an example, maybe an
Yeah.
extreme example, but a important one.
Yeah. Um so then the other like side of the coin is my aunt and grandma, my two aunts and grandma came and visited. And uh being like sitting down with them having a conversation, there is this familiarity,
Hmm.
family
Yeah.
familiarity. Oh, I wonder if those are rooted in the same
Oh,
word.
what?
Okay.
Mind blown.
Yeah, like there was this comfort and there was this like our mannerisms, our tastes, the way we think.
Hmm.
There are similarities that are
You
undeniably
get a bunch of
there.
Becker women together, and it's a spectacle to behold.
But like it's so meaningful in this particular way that couldn't be like it couldn't
Hmm.
be replicated with a friendship. It couldn't be
No.
replaced. It's
Hmm.
just it is that thing. And I feel likewise you felt that way.
Yeah. I mean, I have three siblings
Mhm.
that I didn't exactly grow up with. 'Cause my parents were divorced. They all lived with my mom. I lived with my dad. I was functionally an only child, but I'm not an only child. I'm one of four.
Mm-hmm.
And I've only been in a room with all four of them like twice in my life.
Yeah.
And one of those was after my mom passed.
Yeah.
And we were all hanging out in my older brother's kitchen, and I uh, I was just kind of sitting and watching these people. I was thinking, uh, I'm really struggling with the words to it, but the sense of being one of many
Mm-hmm.
rather than being an individual. Because and my whole life I've stood alone on things,
Yeah.
and I felt safe.
Yeah.
There was a sense of safety in being around these people who were part of my family, and I think that's the flip side of that coin of, oh yeah, your family is forever. You can, and the relationships can actually be very shallow because you don't have to really fight to maintain them. But on the other hand, you don't have to fight to maintain them. You know that you have these
They're
people's love.
there. Yeah, or not. I mean, because that's where it can get tricky
Okay,
too. Like you can have very
your
dysfunctional.
family could suck. I don't
They
know.
could
My
suck.
my
You could
point
need boundaries,
my
but they're
point
still
though is
your
that
family.
they're still your family. You still there's a
You have
I am
things
not alone.
alike with them.
And I've gone through just enough therapy to know that my greatest fear is of being alone.
Yeah.
So having that moment of
Oh.
like,
I'm.
oh, I am not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm supposed to think that about Jesus, but it's
Uh-huh.
much different when you're in a room with a group of people that are your
Right
family.
there, tangibly sitting
Yeah.
there. Oh.
Christina was telling me about uh, her revelation about the mannerisms of her aunts, which is funny because I'm really attracted to this Becker woman. So when all the all the
Other.
aunts are around, they're like, wow,
Ah.
these all kind of look like my wife just a little bit,
This is
and
awkward.
I'm confused. Not awkward. I'm enjoying it. It's confusing.
Jeez, you're
uh,
terrible.
but as you're saying that, it's weird. I've read Harry Potter far more than I've read the Bible in my life. So my mind goes to, I know a Harry Potter reference in this, and I pull out. I have the illustrated Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone on my
Uh-huh.
bookshelf.
And it took him like less than a minute to find the particular passage
To
that
be
he wanted to share.
where Harry finds the mirror of Irized, which, if you haven't read the book, is desire spelled backwards, and the mirror shows you nothing more or less than the deepest desires of your heart. And
Mm-hmm.
Harry, who has never known his family, being an orphan child, stands in front of the mirror and he sees his mom and dad behind him. And behind them, the rest of his extended family. And there's this long paragraph of he saw green eyes looking back at him, and he saw tousled black hair, and he even saw one little old man with the same knobbly knees.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so meaningful that he saw himself reflected in these other people. And so, like, whereas I should be like, oh, I have a scripture reference for this. I'm like, I have a Harry Potter reference for this. Let me read you a passage from Harry Potter.
Uh-huh.
But it was so on point with what she was saying.
Yeah.
I look nothing like the rest of my family.
Yeah. You don't.
No.
That's a good point too. Like you
I do think
and
Aaron
your
looks like Tom though.
yes, our kiddo.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. And he's an interesting Becker mix too. Like it's
Yeah.
he's a mix of our
But there's something in the angularity of the eyes.
There's another angle though that we wanted to talk about.
Well, we were talking about it in terms of community and what is community, and when people talk about the government in a positive light, which is not many people we hang out with to talk about the government in a positive light. They say government is just a thing that we do together,
Uh-huh.
which is true in a very local community sense. So we, because of our relationship with our family, the places that we've always lived far away from family, and that's really shaped
And that
our
part
viewpoints
in
here.
part, yeah, leads to
So we've always really leaned into our community support. And you could argue that that's what a government is and is supposed to do. It's a community support.
communism.
Communism, community. Hey, so we're just
There's
like nailing the etymology
common
today.
things there. Yeah.
Nailing
Yeah.
the etymology.
So it's not all good, but
It's not all good. It's not all good. It's not all bad, because the concept of a local community coming together to support the people that are in need within the community is exactly what we're supposed to do.
uh-huh.
I think people will ascribe that to a federal government that's thousands of miles away and expect the same results.
Yeah.
But their hearts are actually in the right place of thinking, no, our community is supposed to together solve these problems.
Mm-hmm.
I think in a perfect world, things are handled in a small community sense. And in a more perfect world, your family is local too, and the community is an interwebbing of families.
Yeah.
Uh,
But there's kind of like there's three layers that we kind of dug into, because one of the components where I was talking about our preference or our inclination toward deep, meaningful friendships over family as our first line of support, the next level of like being in Seattle and seeing the political differences from the Southeast and the Northwest,
Mm-hmm.
is that like we are on the trajectory, but not really. Like we're on the next gradient. We're on the next path toward um individual, and like, so if we already like think of friends as higher than family, um politically speaking, do we now not
We
hold reverence for a family
exactly.
in the same level that we hold reverence for a family here?
And as a consequence, if we're not holding
Reverence
thank
or
you, for the
appreciation,
family, you then have to default to this reverence for community. And if you take that the
or
step further, you start
for
holding this
government,
reverence for government.
yeah, government state policy.
Hmm.
So you end up creating policies that are individualistic and not necessarily looking out
Well,
for a
and
family unit the same way.
they are communal in the non-familial sense, which is to say,
Yes.
because they're not individualistic, and that's the problem, is that we are so atomistic, or we're so atomistic in Washington that we then have to defer to the government in order to have any bond between us
Oh, you mean
whatsoever. Uh,
anonymous?
no,
That's
no,
what animistic.
atomistic, like as individuals, as individual atoms in,
Oh,
in a larger body. So what we found in Washington government policy is that the policy was driven towards
the
um,
individual.
separating children from parents because uh, there's no value in a family unit.
Yeah.
The government needs to take care of your children because you have a job to do, is to go back to work as soon as you can. So state funded daycare, universal pre-K, all these things, because parents are bad
Or
and
parents
family is
aren't,
bad.
yeah, like the least
The
common
government
denominator.
knows better than you
Yeah,
how to raise your
family.
kids. We are
Yeah.
the experts,
Yeah.
after all. And so there is your job ends when the child's born, because parents have no particular expertise on parenting, which is true,
And of
actually.
course, keep in mind, Bill is speaking with he's trying to illustrate like the undertones of what is potentially there that aren't said out loud, but it's
No,
felt.
but it's
Like it's
felt.
very hard.
Well, and they are said out loud. This was a thing when the whole Virginia governor race was happening, and there was people on a certain side of the aisle who were saying, "I don't want to have a say in what my children learn. That's for the experts to have. I want them to know more than I do, so I shouldn't have any say in what the school says."
Okay.
That was explicitly stated
Yeah.
at the time of that fiasco.
Yeah.
And that's something we noticed coming here to Florida, is like, no, the family is the primary building block of our
Of
society.
society. That's where is the family the building block? Is the state like supposed to, like, how does the state govern
Hmm.
it? And when you get to like an individual, and that's where like we did see like culturally, like and not totally like bashing on like the Northwest, I would point out that after seeing families who are highly dysfunctional, the intent is to protect a child
Hmm.
from a very bad situation. So we end up treating people like the least common denominator, the parent who is legitimately barely scraping by, potentially an addict, and not taking care of their child. So
Hmm.
we are going to meet and greet each child with that kind of attitude,
Like, abusive
as if
parents
all parents
exist.
aren't capable.
Abusive parents exist,
Yes.
and more, and any abusive parent is more than what's acceptable. But the the
The coming from
consequence,
that view.
if you perceive every parent as a potential threat,
Mhm.
then what you end up having is a educational institution, the Department of Education in at the federal and at the Washington state level anyway, that believe that the greatest good can only come from removing children from parents
Mhm.
as soon as possible.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's the flip side. As much as we want to lean into community, because we've seen such beauty from that
Yeah.
and such growth from that, there
And we've
is.
seen the profound relationships, and we personally see scripturally
Mhm,
where discipleship, how you walk with Christ and how you walk with each other and you refine each other through
mhm,
relationship, is a gospel good. Like it's an intended choice.
mhm.
So go ahead.
But those are local and individual face-to-face relationships, not the ones that you're outsourcing to
A state.
a faceless bureaucracy that's in another city or another state.
Mhm.
So it's one of those things where I have compassion for folks who want the government to do good, because that is a good desire.
Mm-hmm.
What they want is the right thing. They're just putting it in the wrong place,
Or potentially at the expense
of
an appreciation for
and
family.
it'd be too easy for me, because of opinions I hold, to just say, well, they're all evil, and that's not true.
Uh-huh.
uh they are directionally right.
Prioritizing something
Yeah.
slightly different, valuing, and then how it
They're
plays out.
well, and in the exact same way we are, like, we're looking in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
um so I'm trying to have compassion for people with a different viewpoint than me,
Yeah.
and I don't think
And
I'm
that's
doing it very successfully.
and that's the point, is that's why it's really, really hard. And that's where, like, we this tension we just have to wrestle with. And hopefully in sharing all of these thoughts, you might wrestle with it too. Like, do you go to support family first, or have you had to choose friends first, like, as your go-to? And even within our own hearts, we hope that our boys, like, we are raising them in and hoping that they will want to be friends with us when they are adults, and that we will have a more interactive role in their life. um but that also said, we don't like dislike our family for not living next door. We understand, like, how we've made choices in our families. Like, we live in different places, and
Mhm.
that has kind of driven it where our immediate family is not our first choice in support.
Mhm.
um but then we hope that our boys have a more familial, like,
Relationship with
in
each other,
relationship with each other, yeah,
and
and
with
us.
us. And
So there's a
there's
lot
a lot
there
to unpack there with generational differences. I mean, we're not the only millennials that have distant relationships with their
with their
boomer parents.
parents. Yeah,
There is a boomer millennial divide that's across the board.
yeah.
Um, but that's a topic for another day.
This week's book recommendation is going to dive into the friendship aspect, and a great read called Friendish: Reclaiming Real Friendship in a Culture of Confusion by Kelly Needham. I thoroughly enjoyed this book because she talks about being selfish, or potentially how friendship has replaced marriage, or mimic marriage. And then she goes into what a friendship could look like and what the redeeming aspects of friendship are. This book is written for a Christian audience, I would say. Gives a lot of scriptural context and presents a perspective of how to identify unhealthy friendships, and how to work through stumbling blocks, and to help you grow and flourish in good relationships and the power that is behind that. So, again, that book is Friendish by Kelly Needham. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and in the spirit of nuance, I hope you found something that you could agree with and disagree with and still choose to lean in. If you're liking the show, please follow us and share it with friends and leave a rating and review. Until next time.